Hi everyone. Today we have Shraddha Gome with us. She is NLSIU graduate 2018 and she was my senior in the college. She was very helpful to me in the college also. Shraddha, before clearing UPSC with rank 60, was working with HUL, and today we are having this discussion with her. And our objective is to understand how did she prepare for the exam, what were the difficulties she faced, and we will also try to understand how can we plan our strategy for the exam. So, hi Shraddha. First of all, congratulations to you. And हमेशा मतलब there are so many things you have done in life, and ये भी बहुत ही बड़ा achievement है. तो congratulations, and thank you for giving us so much time to like talk to you and to understand how things work in UPSC preparation.
First of all, thank you, Himanshu, for a lovely introduction. It's always nice interacting with you. And hello, everyone. I hope through this session, I can be of some help to you guys. So we can take up all sort of queries that you may have, especially given that for law optional, it becomes a little unusual in UPSC, given that we do not have very consolidated material and guidance available at one place. So I hope I can be of some help to you guys.
So we'll be starting with a very basic question that we have. First of all, why did you prepare for the UPSC after having such a great job? So what was your motivation behind the preparation? Can you just tell us something about it?
Right. So I think I was working at a wonderful place and I was having a great experience, but I always came from a mindset that if I have the opportunity to create larger difference at a larger scale, I would always seek that opportunity. And for me, UPSC was that platform. I think you do not need to do something revolutionary when you are a civil servant. Your everyday work can change lives of thousands of people around you. So I think that has been my biggest motivation. And you have seen me, I've always been in the college as well, very active in these clubs or be it leadership positions. So I think that's what I've continued further post-college as well.
That's true. So one more thing we have that. So when we were talking last time, you told me you didn't go to Delhi for preparation. और जनरली ऐसे ही होता है कि वी गेट दिस फियर ऑफ मिसिंग आउट कि हम दिल्ली नहीं जा रहे हैं, हम जहाँ पर हैं वहाँ रह के प्रिपरेशन कर रहे हैं. सो हाउ डिड यू प्रिपेयर एट होम, हाउ डिड यू स्टार्ट द प्रिपरेशन? बिगिनिंग में काफ़ी डिफिकल्टी होती है, सो वो आपने कैसे प्लान किया, सब कुछ थोड़ा बताएंगे?
Right. So I think I was very clear that I'm not going to Delhi and prepare for UPSC. My reason was very simple, that I wanted to be at home closer to family so that I don't have to worry about other peripheral things while preparing for UPSC. So that was my foremost priority. Also, I was preparing at a COVID time, right? So you anyways don't have much of an option due to extraordinary circumstances. But I think there is no perfect recipe to cracking this examination. And a physical location is not going to make a huge difference. I think there'll be pros and cons of both being in Delhi and being not in Delhi. So I think wherever you are, as per your personal circumstances and choices, what you have to make sure is what are those cons that you need to be mindful of. Now, for instance, when I was not in Delhi, one of the considerations for me was to be in touch with people to know what was happening and what was the extent of competition. This was being my first attempt. I really didn't know where I stood on a related scale, right? And there are people who prepare and put in so much hard work, and probably they deserve much more than we people who clear would. But there are a lot of factors that come into play. So my only advice would be that whether you choose to be in Delhi or you choose to be prepared from your hometown or any other location, the only thing you need to do is to have a right strategy in place. And talking about my strategy was very simple, that I'm going to focus on the low-hanging fruits. What I mean when I say this is that you do not run after things that are asked, say, 1 or twice in 10 years. You focus on things which are repeated on a very usual basis in UPSC examination. And what is repeated and what is the requirement, only two things can help you. The foremost is UPSC syllabus. It's like the grand norm, the constitution of a country, right? UPSC syllabus is going to guide you on what UPSC expects and demands of a candidate. And similarly, a little explanatory note to this are the past year question papers. that will help you decipher what are those syllabus terms referring to. So I think these are the two things that I kept handy with me, and I paved that direction to my preparation.
Right. So there are three stages of the exam: prelims, mains, and interview. And prelims has its own challenges. बहुत वाइड हो जाता है, that you have to cover things. तो वो कैसे आपने प्रिपेयर किया, और उसमें क्या, like did you focus more on solving the questions or more on studying the subjects? How did you prepare that subject?
Right. So Himanshu, I think you need to have a judicious mix of both. Mere knowledge without practice will not help you go anywhere. Similarly, mere practice without gaining the basic knowledge won't help you either. So I think there has to be a proper balanced mix. Now, how do you do that? So my strategy for prelims was very simple. First, I'm going to cover the standard textbooks that are there for all the subjects, right? And as I repeated earlier also, I'm going to focus on the low-hanging fruits. For example, Polity Lakshmikant, history, modern history spectrum. These are the questions, that they'll be repeated from here, right? Constitution, bare text. Especially for law student and law optional, I think bare text knowledge helps you not just in prelims, but also in mains. For example, in my year, there was one of the questions on Article 21 or something along that line. And it was a very direct question from Constitution, right? So I think that knowledge helps you. Now, regarding practicing mock papers also, I think that's very important, because that helps you, first of all, have a strategy that you are going to follow. Because as you know, even the toppers there, right, people who clear, even those people only know 30 to 40 questions perfectly from those 100 questions. Remaining are intelligent guesses, right? Now, how do you do that? That only happens when you've practiced enough number of questions, so you know that, okay, there's a repeated pattern to this. Or even if there's no pattern to it, by solving those questions and having those notes, you'll be able to eliminate at least one or two of the options, or a likelihood of it. Now, for example, when I wrote my attempt 2021, there was this question I remember, and that question was that Mother's Tongue Language Day is celebrated on a certain date by, I think it was UNICEF. Now, I didn't know what the date was, but I knew one thing, that UNICEF is not going to celebrate it. It's UNESCO, which deals with cultural and social matters, right? So I knew that UPSC was playing around. So I played along. So I think you have to be little in your frame of mind in those 2 hours, because at the end of the day, I think UPSC examination is not just about your knowledge, it's also about your qualities. And when you are in that, so once you take on the responsibility as an administrator, right, you will have to take decisions on spot, which are going to affect thousands of lakhs of people around you, and you'll be handling intense pressure. So it's just a teaser sort of situation in preliminary or mains, that how are you able to handle those 2 hours of your life, knowing that next 2 years of your life depend on those 2 hours. So I think I took it lightly in that sense, that not lightly in terms of joke, but I knew that, okay, if you are calm, you'll be able to make it through. And I think that helped, because these are the sort of questions that only a calm mind can understand. Otherwise, our first instinct would be to leave and go next. So practice enough mocks, but practice them with having a solid background of the standard textbook and knowledge material. But yes, most important, do not run after multiple sources. Especially for people who are in Delhi, you will have thousands of sources for a single text or a book or a subject, right? So it's the most dangerous thing to run after those. Just focus on the standard basic text, revise them multiple times, and I'm sure that will yield you good results.
Right. So in this year paper, we realized that CSAT was a paper in which many students failed. Even when they were clearing the GS paper, they weren't able to clear the CSAT. So did you prepare anything for CSAT, or like because you had this CLAT exam, like you cleared the CLAT examination and you studied at law college? So do you think it helped you in some way, or did you prepare for CSAT?
Right. So as you correctly mentioned that since we do, a lot of people, most of them appear for CLAT examination, and we do have aptitude being tested. So it gives us an edge, especially in areas of English, critical reasoning, or logical reasoning. So these were my strength as well. But I did not take it lightly either. In fact, I was really fearing CSAT paper even in my year, because my fear was that what if I don't clear CSAT? So for that, I think that fear is very important, because that fear made me attempt previous year CSAT papers to know where I was uh, scoring. And I attempted some 4 to 5 papers, and in all that, my score was 110 plus. So I knew that, okay, I'm in a comfortable space, that even if they throw some random things, I'll be still past the cut. And I think that reflected in my CSAT marks also this year. I scored some 120 plus, which is along the same range that I was scoring during my practice sessions. So my only advice would be that, as it happened this year in 2022, there are a lot of people who cleared paper one but could not clear paper two. It was because paper one is very factual. So we tend to fear it more, saying that we need revision. But what if, even if you get 150 in paper one and you do not clear the cutoff in paper two, it's a waste. So you do not ignore CSAT and paper two, just practice them. And I think it's easily doable. Just know the areas where the questions are being asked and practice them. So it won't take much time on your part.
Right, right. Like you have very beautifully covered the prelims examination. So let's move on to the mains part. In mains, we have 9 papers. We start with English and then Hindi. And then we have GS 1, 2, 3, 4. And then there are optional papers. And essay paper is also in the beginning. So did you prepare anything for English or Hindi, or you found them very easy, like looking at the past year question papers? And what was your strategy in regard to that?
So I looked at the past year papers, and I realized that English and Hindi compulsory papers were not trouble for me.
Right.
So that's a very personal thing that you can only judge for yourself whether that's going to be hindrance or not. Right. So I realized solving those papers and having a look that, okay, these 2 papers I can manage. So I actually didn't prepare for them. Right. So these 2 papers I didn't prepare, but yeah, I did have an idea of what to expect when I enter the examination hall for these papers.
So let's move on to the essay paper. Last year's essay paper was something very different. That's what people said. Both the section A and B had. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, both the section A and B had philosophical essays, and some people actually didn't do that well in essays. So, what do you suggest to those people? How should they prepare for essays, and how much they should write the essays? How many essays they should write, and how do they get those essays evaluated? So,
right. So, beginning with your first question on how to prepare for essays. So, I think for me, the preparation for essay and GS4 paper was very integrated. Because I realized what I read for GS4, I was using that in essay, and vice versa. Because as you correctly mentioned, now UPSC pattern is catering more towards philosophical concepts, right? These are mostly covered in GS4 papers also. So my suggestion would be that, first of all, do not ignore essay paper, knowing that, okay, I'll manage it. Because the point is not to manage it, the point is to do well in these papers, because these are the papers that are going to determine your rank. Right. So essay paper therefore has to be prepared well. Now, how do you prepare? So for me, my approach was this way, that for any topic that I picked up, I used to give myself 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes to create a framework. Now, in that framework, I would just think of, if this is the topic, what would be my opening story? How I'm going to conclude? What are the statistics that I can use from my GS or GS4 paper? Similarly, what are the dimensions I can think of? It's not necessary that I'm going to write all these dimensions, right? So for example, you have political, social, economic is one sphere. You have individual, society, that's one aspect. You have temporal dimensions. You have national, international dimensions. So there are very multiple dimensions that you use differently. But my point was to be able to think along all these aspects for a single topic. So that's how I practice. So even if I did not devote, say, 1.5 hours to writing an essay on a very daily basis, at least I would create a framework which gave me confidence that, okay, I have the fillers. I can create a structure based on these. Now, there are value additions that you can do, of course, for your essay papers as well. Now, what are these value additions? So first of all is the subheadings that you use. You can make it more intelligent or attractive. Similarly, the stories that you use. Now, for example, when I wrote my essay on the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, right? I use example of New Zealand Prime Minister carrying her baby and addressing the parliament. So this is not something that I prepared beforehand. This is something that I read in the newspaper and that clicked me at that moment. Similarly, one of the first topic that I, in fact, attempted the essay, and I've not met another person who attempted the same, is real is rational, rational is real. Now, it's a very unusual topic to think of, but I had earlier read Plato's allegory of cave, and somehow I could fit a story in that. So all these things, as I earlier mentioned, my GS4 papers helped me do it. So my suggestion to you would be that devote some time for these papers, prepare them, bring on value additions, and also learn to think on spot. Like, don't be uncomfortable with the fact that, okay, it's something you're seeing for the first time, because UPSC preparation equips you well to handle any sort of essay topics or questions for that matter. It's just that you have to be calm in that situation and just try to recall what you can fit in those hours. So that would be my suggestion for essay.
Right. So we should have a framework in which we practice, and then we should also practice more to come up with the new arguments in the paper. Right. You also mentioned that your GS4 preparation was very integrated with essay paper. So how did you manage the GS paper? Because there are case studies in it and there is theoretical part. So both of the parts are there, and they say that GS4 paper is very, very long to attempt. So
right.
How did you attempt the paper and how did you prepare for it?
Right. So I had two approach. One is the part one based on the theoretical concepts that I asked, and part two is the case studies. Now, beginning with case studies, I realized that most of us are going to write the same answers, right? There'll be very little difference. So what's going to make a difference is the way we present it. So what I did was I basically looked at the past year toppers who have scored extremely well in GS4 papers and tried to understand how they presented the answer. So I looked at 2-3 such copies and I got a few things that I can actually add in my answers and create a more creative framework. So that was my approach for case studies. Also, I made sure that I do good amount of case studies practice before I enter the examination hall. So practice and looking at the past year toppers copy helped me for case studies in GS4.
Right.
Now coming to the theoretical aspect, what I did was I used my own personal examples to enrich my answers. And I actually kept an eye for any essay and ethics related news in the newspapers also. So if there was a civil servant who was doing extremely well, or if there were news on, say, any Supreme Court judgment that I could use, I used to keep an eye for all these and actually note them down in Evernote or any other notebook that you use and use them in my answer. So that's what I did differently for the first part of GS4.
Right. So let me come to this GS1 and GS3. So GS1 is basically very static part. History is there, then post-independence, world history, and geography and society. So did you have any other approach for this part, or like you collaborated with some part of current affairs also? So how did you manage this paper?
Right. So for GS1, my approach was basically revision and consolidation.
Okay.
I did not run after multiple sources. I did not worry, okay, there is another book by Bipin Chandra or another book on modern history. I actually kept my sources very minimal, but I did multiple revision because GS1 is a paper which is very factual in nature, especially history, art, and culture, right? So you tend to forget them very easily if you don't revise them on a very regular basis. So my focus was revision. And also for mains, you need a holistic picture. Like now, UPSC is no longer asking very straightforward questions. Like Spectrum will not have a chapter on it, what UPSC will ask you. It's actually integrating 2-3 aspects and then questions are being put forth. So after reading, say, I'll give you an example. So after reading Spectrum few chapters, right, I would actually think of, okay, these are the 3 chapters that I read today. What are the sort of questions that UPSC can create? Consolidating all 3. So, for example, a role of Mahatma Gandhi during our freedom struggle. Now, it's a very broad question and it has very other dimensions to it. But UPSC expects you to answer that in like, that's 6.5 to 7 minutes, right? So that can only happen if you've thought about these earlier, and not very exact questions, but along the similar lines. So that's what actually I used to do. I used to replicate that, and after having read the chapter, I used to see whether UPSC can actually mix and match and ask me. So GS1 was that, but there are few portions. So example, society in GS1. That's very contemporary. So my focus in society was not just on static portion, but also how I can integrate current happenings in it. So for example, mob lynching, you'll have examples on that. You'll have Supreme Court judgments and expansion of fundamental rights. You will have examples of good work being done in terms of, say, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. So I think all these are examples of social influence, persuasion that you can actually use. So that was my GS1 society part was very contemporary. Others were mostly based on standard textbooks.
And GS3, so GS3 is very current related because there is economy in it. There is a part on environment, internal security. So like, did you cover that part from a particular book or like newspaper? How did you prepare that?
Right. So one of the two most important parts of these are economy and environment, right? So for economy, I did the standard material that's there. So I read it from Ramesh Singh book and other materials that I have. But apart from that, I also created notes of my own through my own research. For example, you know that on a very regular basis, questions being asked on, say, human capital. Questions are being asked on the nature of economy that's being there, and why that's not being able to cater to inclusive growth. Now, I didn't want to rely on standard material that's available readily in the market, because I knew that everyone is buying that material and everyone is going to write along the same line. So what difference I can make in my answers? And also, I'm someone who I am very comfortable doing my own sort of research and coming with my own answers. So therefore, for these kind of questions, I used to take A4 sheets and I used to note down, say, for inclusive growth, I'll note down what, say, UN chief has said about it, inclusive growth, how different people have defined it. I'll give an example of which are the countries where inclusive growth is actually there. What are the concerns in other countries? What is the state in India? So I think when you do that preparation, it's not just a preparation on inclusive growth, but it's also a larger preparation. All these statistics, sports can help me come handy anywhere. So for economy on these topics, I actually did my own research. For example, statistics on the poverty line. What changes you need to make? Are we faring sufficiently well? What is the status in India? So these are the research that I did. Similarly, for environment, I added statistics and my own research, and I didn't solely rely on Shankar IS book that I used. So for environment, also say plastic pollution, I had 3-4 statistics with me that I can use anywhere. Because these are very often repeated topics that are being asked. Similarly, for environment, so environment preparation for prelims and mains is very different. What we generally do from standard textbook and coaching material is a prelims based preparation. Right. It does not equip for us with the mains related preparation. So for mains, you'll have to do your own work. And that's exactly what I did. I actually researched on my own and added A4 sheets to the areas that I think were helpful.
So, so when we come to GS2 paper and the law optional, if you are from the law background, so we find that both of them overlap at some point. People say that you shouldn't write GS2 answers like law optional answers. So how did you differentiate between both of them? What was your idea?
Right. So I think that's a very important suggestion that we received, that do not confuse GS2 with law optional. And that's a very dangerous line, especially for law students, right? Because for us, constitution is one of the comfort areas. And once we're in our comfort zone, we tend to digress from what is the requirement of a question, right? So my approach was that in law optional, the focus will be more on the sections, articles, and the case laws. In GS2 paper, the focus instead would be more upon the analytical part of it. What is the status right now? So for example, polity, the first question that I had in my year when I wrote the paper was constitutional morality. Now, you can of course take it along the dimensions of what the Supreme Court judges have said. But if you make your entire answer based on that, that's a law optional answer. So you have to then define what is constitutional morality, who coined that term, how Indian society, whether it's reflecting constitutional morality or not, how constitutional morality is different from popular morality. And to support your answers, you can use Supreme Court judgments or articles from the Constitution. But the latter is not going to be the foundation of your answer. The foundation will be more the theoretical part or the analytical part of it. So that was one thing that I was mindful of. But for polity, my suggestion would be that for mains, don't just rely on Lakshmikant. Like for prelims, Lakshmikant is more than enough, according to me. But for mains, now UPSC is asking very analytical and application-based questions, right? So for that, for every static topic that you've read from Lakshmikant, you also need to have ready examples, statistics, and what is the current state right now. So for example, in defection law, you should know what the Supreme Court has told about replacing speaker. In terms of parliamentary work, you should know, okay, what is the status of the number of sittings that are happening? What are the challenges? What are the good stuff that is happening? So you need to go beyond the text to relate it to the current happenings so that you have a broad picture. And I do not suggest that you do this exercise in those 3 hours when you sit in the examination. You need to do this exercise beforehand. You need to be prepared that, okay, if speaker question is asked, I'm going to cite these 2 examples. If a governor question is asked, I'm going to cite these 2 examples. And one thing that helped me also, so everyone suggested that your quality answer should end on a very positive framework. What improvement, solution-oriented approach that we talk about, right? So for solution-oriented approach, what I focused upon mostly was what are the good stuff that is being done in other jurisdictions, especially UK, US, that we can replicate or take inspiration from for our own country. So that's one thing that I think helped me do well in GS2 paper.
So overall, like you covered all the GS subjects, but one more question that comes to me. So there are these suggestions that come to us whenever we write our answers, that we should write in the points format or we should write in the paragraph, and it gets very confusing which approach we should take. So what was your approach in answering these type of in answering the questions, to take the points approach or the paragraph approach?
Right. So see, it's a very personal approach or a choice that you exercise, right? And everyone will have a different approach to it. I was more comfortable using point format, right? So I used point-based answers. But then I was also mindful that a very similar pattern for, say, all 20 questions is going to be very boring for the person who's checking my answers. And I don't want that person to be bored of seeing my answer copy. Or the score would also be very boring. So what I did was there were questions I identified that I can use, say, a paragraph-based approach. I use some diagrams that can make answers really innovative. So I actually used a mix of all these, but most dominant form in my answers has been point-based approach.
So also one more thing, like, did you finish all the papers in the examination? And if you did, how did you prepare to make sure that you finish all the papers? Like, how many papers one should write in the practice to achieve that level, like to finish completing the paper in the examination?
Right. So I did finish all my papers in the examination. And I think that's one of the important things, because when you finish those answers, it automatically gives you an edge of, say, 5-10 marks, which is going to make a huge difference when you cumulatively, right? So for my approach for this was, I knew that I need to finish the papers. And when I actually began, I could not. So I actually spoke to quite a few people previously who did well, and I was given very realistic suggestions also. For example, Jaydev, I spoke to him and he told me that, okay, Shraddha, do one thing. Just assume that you have 3 hours with you. And even in practice, it's just those 3 hours. In fact, it's not even 3 hours. It's like 2 hours, 50 minutes, 55 minutes or something. because all these people who are invigilators in the examination, they also have a very subjective approach. So some are going to take your signatures like they did for our center in those 3 hours. You can't really rely on them. So what I did in the while I was practicing also was that I used to give myself those 2 hours 55 minutes, and exactly at that point I used to put down my paper and pen. No, so it was not like, okay, oh, now it's happening, later on I'll see in the examination it will happen. See, of course it's going to be easier in examination. If you're finishing say 18 questions while practicing, in examination you'll most probably finish 19 or even 20, because automatically you are in that speed zone. But you can't solely rely on that also. Your focus should be that you attempt most of your papers even in practice within the stipulated time period, and that can only happen with practice. So you can have a graded approach. Now what do I mean by graded approach? Say you give yourself 30 minutes, and then you keep that, okay, in 30 minutes first I'm going to finish say 3. If you're taking a lot of time, I'm going to finish 3 questions. Then in the question you can identify certain patterns, that maybe you're using unnecessary words, maybe you're being repetitive, or you're using elements that are not even asked in the question. Once you've identified that, in the next round of practice you're going to be mindful to not make those similar mistakes. So your time will reduce to say 10 minutes, and you will continue this till the time within those 30 minutes you're going to finish the target amount of questions. Now once your mind is used to answering in that format, you can then expand that 30 minutes to say a 2-hour test, and gradually to 3-hour test. See, if on the first day itself we assume that, okay, in 3 hours I'm going to finish the paper, it's not going to happen, no matter how hard you try, because your mind is then tailored to a certain way of answering the question. So to improve that, you have to have a graded approach. Do it in 30 minutes, do it in 40 minutes, expand it to 1 hour, expand it to 2 hours, and you'll realize that slowly you are able to finish the paper in 3 hours. So that's what I did.
So let's move on to the law optional part. The problem with law optional is that we don't have that much material available, not that much guidance available. How did you prepare the law optional, paper 1 and paper 2?
Right. So for law optional, basically I mostly relied on my college notes, but I also complemented it with other materials that was tailored to the requirement that UPSC has from law candidates, right? So now for that matter, example would be that I used my constitutional law notes and complemented with some portions and a selective reading of MP Jain. Similarly for ILIU Shaw. Now it's a very personal choice which material or book you want to refer to. You all just have to make sure that you have the requisite material that's being asked repeatedly in the UPSC examination. Now, I was more comfortable reading books and doing the selective reading, but I've also seen that a lot of candidates find Dukki more readily usable, right? So that's one thing that you can also do. If you're more comfortable with standard text, read them, do a selective reading. But if you are comfortable with summarized notes itself, you can always pick up Dukkis on a subject and then use them to enrich your answers. Now, approach for paper 1 and paper 2 would be a bit different. So if I may expand upon this, paper 1, constitutional law, IL and administrative law, you have a clear approach because we have standard material. We know what sort of questions are being asked and they revolve around the same areas, right? So it's easier for us to have a question bank and create model answers for them. But for paper 2, it's a bit area of concern because there's a subject called contemporary legal developments, which is a terror in itself, given the expanse of it. And similarly, case laws is a concern when it comes to crim law or contracts or torts. So my suggestion for paper 2 would be that for crim, contracts and torts, do not run after a lot of cases. Instead, try to focus on the bare text and illustrations that are there. Now, this does not apply to torts, right? So torts will have to do with cases. But for crim and contracts, you can read the bare text, read the illustrations, and use them equally well as any other case law, for that matter. And second aspect on contemporary legal developments, make sure that you do a preparation that's suited to a UPSC examination. We do not need a PhD in those subjects, right? And UPSC is not asking very in-depth answers or very section-oriented answers, barring few questions, right? So it's easier for us to do a very holistic reading, a overall understanding of a subject, and also important sections to be remembered. Like, what for a copyright, you would remember that, okay, what are the fair dealing clauses? What are the exceptions? What are the exclusive ownership rights? What are the moral rights? So I think that's all that's required. So just be mindful of the UPSC syllabus while preparing for law optional as well.
Right. Also, did you prepare any did you join any test series for the law option? And was that helpful?
Right. Yeah. So I did join a test series for law optional, but it comes with a caveat that I only attempted 3 of their mocks, right? So I really can't comment on how helpful it may or may not be. But my reason for doing only 3 mocks was because I was actually doing a lot of answer writing, even for law, in terms of model answers. And it was also something that I was comfortable in. But it's not something that I will recommend to other candidates. I think practicing answers for optional is equally important. And your choice of any test series has to be not just based on the quality of questions, but also the quality of feedback that you receive. So I think a lot of materials, a lot of guidance that is there. You may choose one, but make sure that you request them for a proper detailed feedback.
And how much time one requires to finish the law option? Like, it's a vast option if one has to prepare for it. So,
Right. So, yeah, please complete.
and did you also like attempt the previous year questions? So, did you prepare any model answers for it? How did you go about it? So, these are the two
Right.
questions.
So, yeah. So, coming to the first question on how long it will take to prepare law option, it actually depends on combination of factors. Whether you are someone who is graduate in law, so it will be easier for you compared to a person who's picking up law for the first time. Similarly, are you a person who is interested in law? So your devotion of time and your reading would be much faster compared to someone who took law option only because they are a graduate or are more familiar with the subject, right? So there is no a strict timeline for that, but I do believe that a proper good reading and a preparation of law optional would actually require 3 to 4 months. I devoted around 3.5 months, and I devoted it in the beginning when I just began my preparation. I finished my optional, I kept it aside, and then jumped to GS. And on regular basis, I used to even revise my law optional. So that was my approach. Now, your second question in terms of, could you repeat your
Faster
second
question.
question?
Faster
Yes,
questions. So,
yes. So your second question on whether I used past year questions. So absolutely yes. I created a question bank, and I also created model answers for the repeated questions that are there. I think it makes our job much easier. So for all the areas, especially like IL, constitutional law, where you can do this exercise, I would definitely recommend it.
so these were the questions that I mostly had, and you covered all of them. Thank you for that. There are certain questions which were asked by the aspirants on our the mentorship project page. So I think I should ask them because you have already
Yes.
covered most of them. So I'm asking only the few which weren't covered in our conversation.
All right.
So there is this student, Subhi Pai. She asked when to start the preparation and how should one start preparation. We have already covered the start the preparation part. She's in the third year of the college and she finds the college very hectic. So she's asking when to start the preparation.
Yeah. So hi, Subhi. What is her
Sur-
name? I
Sur-
didn't get.
Surbi Pari.
Subhi. Yeah. Hi. Yeah. So hi. First of all, there is no perfect time to start UPSC preparation. It's a choice that you exercise. If you're someone who wants to write the examination immediately after your college, then maybe your penultimate year and the final year would be devoted to a preparation for UPSC. If you're someone who, as you mentioned, that if your college is already very hectic, and you want to be enjoying your college life along with doing well in academics, then I would say that be kind to yourself, give yourself that time, prepare for your college during that time, and after that, take a year break, prepare for CSC, and then appear for the examination. But I think a confused state is a very risky thing. So don't just have a clear strategy whether you want to do it now or you want to do it a year after. See, at the end of the day, UPSC is anyways a long journey, and it's a very uncertain one as well. So clarity can actually reduce the uncertainty. So Sylvie, that would be my suggestion to you, and wish you all the best.
One question is from Priyank Shukla. So he asked when to start answer writing practice. He's in the fifth year of the college and he thinks he wants to ask what strategy one should follow in the last year of the college.
Right. So, hi Priyank. Regarding your first question, when to start your preparation, my suggestion would be that have a foundation already created before you start answer writing. I do not subscribe to the view that you should start answer writing on the day one itself when you have very little idea of the subject or what is the requirement. So, my suggestion would be that prepare a topic, look at the past year papers, and then attempt questions on that topic. But having said that, do not even wait to finish the syllabus also, because the syllabus will not finish even a day before the examination. So you cannot rely on that. Finish a topic, do answer writing, and continue to improve upon it.
Thank you, Shraddha, for that. There is this one last question I will ask. So this is from Yatharth Gupta, and in his own words, he says that he thinks that competition in UPSC is next level, and that thought is stopping him to prepare for the same. How to overcome this fear?
Yeah. So hi Yatharth. I think in life nothing is going to come easy, and same applies for UPSC as well. As you correctly mentioned, the competition is intense, and it's not intense just in UPSC, but it's intense in any competitive examination that you now look at, right? Be it at the graduation level, be it post graduation level. So I think a better approach to tackling this fear would be to focus on things that are in our control, right? You can't anyways in life control things which are outside of our hands, right? So my way to judge my performance has always been what I can do in the examination. My barometer has always been whether I have done justice to the role that I took on, whether I gave my best to the preparation, and if the answer is yes, be content with it. So do not worry about the outcomes. And I can share it from my personal experiences that when you focus on the process, when you have right strategy in place, outcome is well taken care of. But if you waste a lot of time thinking about the competition, about the failure rate, about the things that are not in your control in any ways, then you're only going to take time away from the time that you should otherwise be studying. So do not fear the examination. It's doable. A lot of people do it. I have done it, and I'm very sure that in future and very soon you will also do it. And I see you on the other side of the table. So just start with the preparation, work hard for it, and all that.
Thank you, Shraddha. Thank you for such an inspiring conversation. And you have covered all the doubts that I had. Um, that was more or less we had to ask today. And thanks a lot. Thank you for coming to the mentorship project, and thank you for guiding us. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, and wish you all the best also to the entire team of the mentorship project also. Wish you luck.